The surgeon's steady hands froze when Dr. Maya Carter placed her badge on the counter. Chief of Surgery. The lettering gleamed under the fluorescent lights. "I'll be reviewing your conduct personally," she said, her voice calm but cutting through the tension like a scalpel. Around them, nurses and patients stared in stunned silence. The dismissive smirk on the hospital administrator's face dissolved into panic. The petty insult he'd just delivered to the black woman standing in scrubs was about to cost him more than he could ever imagine. Before we dive into this story of arrogance, power, and reckoning in the heart of a hospital, let me know in the comments where you're watching from. Hit that like button, and don't forget to subscribe to Inspire Now for more incredible real-life tales that remind us why dignity must never be negotiable. Now, let's rewind to see how this extraordinary moment came to be. Dr. Maya Carter was a name whispered with reverence in medical circles across America. At just 45 years old, she had performed over 1,000 successful surgeries, pioneered minimally invasive cardiac techniques now studied in textbooks, and risen to become the youngest and first black woman ever appointed chief of surgery at St. Luke's Medical Center in New York. She was the daughter of a postal worker and a school teacher from Atlanta, Georgia. Growing up, she had studied late at night by the dim light of a borrowed desk lamp while her mother corrected papers at the kitchen table. Scholarships and relentless grit had carried her to Johns Hopkins, then to Harvard Medical School. Every barrier placed in her path, every whispered doubt, every raised eyebrow when she walked into an operating theater had only fueled her resolve. Maya carried herself with the quiet dignity of someone who had nothing left to prove. But as she walked the marble-floored lobby of St. Luke's that morning, she had no idea she was about to collide with a storm that would test not her skill with a scalpel, but her patience, her authority, and her very right to stand where she stood. The hospital bustled with its usual symphony of ringing phones, squeaking wheels, and muffled conversations. Patients in wheelchairs were guided toward elevators. Families clutched paperwork. Doctors hurried past in white coats. At the admissions desk stood Richard Alden, the hospital's longtime operations administrator. A man in his late 50s with thinning silver hair and a penchant for expensive ties, Richard embodied the kind of entitlement that years of unchecked authority often breed. He was not a physician, but he wielded power like a surgeon wields a blade, deciding budgets, allocating resources, and making decisions that affected thousands of patients and staff. Richard had built a reputation for charming board members and donors while being notoriously cold towards staff he deemed beneath him. And though he would never admit it aloud, his biases often revealed themselves in subtle, cutting ways. Today, those prejudices would no longer remain hidden. Maya had come down to admissions to meet with a patient's family, a young black man named Andre Williams, who had been admitted overnight with severe chest pains. His insurance paperwork had been mishandled, delaying treatment until her intervention. She wanted to ensure it didn't happen again. As she approached the counter, Richard stood there, berating a young receptionist. His voice carried across the lobby. "This is a VIP ward, not a charity clinic," Richard snapped. "If these people can't get their paperwork right, then maybe they should consider going elsewhere." The receptionist flushed with embarrassment. Families in line shifted uncomfortably. Maya's eyes narrowed. "Good morning," she said evenly, stepping forward. "I'm here to check on Mr. Andre Williams in Ward C." Richard turned, his gaze sweeping over her scrubs and badge without recognition. He saw only what his prejudice allowed him to see. "And you are?" he asked, his tone flat, almost dismissive. "Dr. Maya Carter," she replied. Richard gave a thin smile. One of the residents. Look, doctor, this is first-class service for important patients, VIP clients. We don't have time to bend over backwards for charity cases. You should leave this to people who understand hospital priorities." The words dropped into the lobby like poison. Nurses froze mid-step. Patients stared. Maya's jaw tightened. "I am the attending surgeon for Mr. Williams," she said calmly. Richard chuckled, waving a dismissive hand. "No, you're not. I know every surgeon who works in this hospital. And believe me, sweetheart, you don't fit the picture." Gasps rippled through the waiting area. "Sweetheart." The word dripped with condescension and insult. Maya slowly reached into her pocket and withdrew her ID badge, placing it flat on the counter between them. Chief of Surgery. The title gleamed. The silence was deafening. I'll be reviewing your conduct personally, she said, her voice steady, controlled, and unmistakably final. The ripple of shock spread quickly. Nurses exchanged glances. Patients whispered. Richard's face went pale, his confidence unraveling as the realization hit. The woman he had just insulted not only belonged here, she was his superior. But Maya didn't raise her voice. She didn't need to. Her authority filled the space more powerfully than anger ever could. What Richard didn't know was that Maya had been quietly observing patterns across the hospital for months. Complaints of delayed treatment disproportionately affected patients of color. Files misplaced. Insurance mistakes. Longer wait times. She had suspected bias, but today's confrontation would strip away any doubt. Word of the lobby incident spread through the hospital like wildfire. By the time Maya returned to her office, 3 staff members had already emailed her accounts of similar experiences. Patients spoken down to, families dismissed, resources withheld. At noon, she convened an emergency meeting. The long mahogany table in the executive boardroom filled with department heads. Richard arrived late, his tie slightly askew, sweat gathering at his brow. "Let's begin," Maya said. Her tone was calm, but no one mistook it for leniency. She projected a series of case files onto the screen, patients whose treatment had been delayed, complaints that had been filed and then quietly buried, stories that all painted the same picture. "Mr. Alden," she said, her eyes fixed on him, "these cases occurred under your oversight. Do you dispute this pattern?" Richard shifted in his chair. "These are isolated issues. Paperwork errors? Miscommunications? You can't possibly think—" "I don't think," Maya interrupted, her voice like a scalpel. "I know, because today I witnessed it firsthand. Your words in the admissions lobby were not miscommunication. They were prejudice. And they reflect a culture I will not allow to persist under my leadership." The room was silent except for the hum of the projector. One by one, staff began to speak. Nurses shared stories. A junior doctor recounted being ignored when advocating for a Latino patient. A social worker described families being redirected to other hospitals for no valid reason. Richard's defenses crumbled with each testimony. Finally, Maya stood. "Healthcare is not a privilege for the few. It is a right for all. And as chief of surgery, I am making it clear. This hospital will no longer tolerate bias, subtle or overt." Effective immediately. "I am recommending the suspension of Mr. Alden pending full investigation." The decision reverberated beyond the walls of St. Luke's. Patients who had long felt invisible suddenly found their voices mattered. Staff who had feared speaking up realized change was possible. Maya Carter's stance became a headline in the local press within days. Black surgeon confronts hospital bias, sparks policy overhaul. Behind the scenes, she worked tirelessly, reviewing complaint systems, implementing new checks to ensure equitable treatment, and personally meeting with families who had been failed in the past. And while Richard Alden lawyered up, claiming wrongful suspension, the evidence against him was overwhelming. Dozens of testimonies, written complaints, and most damning, the memory of a crowded hospital lobby where his words had betrayed him before witnesses who would never forget. 2 months later, St. Luke's unveiled its new patient dignity charter, policies designed to guarantee equal treatment regardless of race, income, or status. Maya led the press conference, standing tall before the cameras. "This isn't about punishment," she said. "It's about accountability. It's about making sure that every person who walks through our doors is treated with the dignity they deserve. Because medicine without humanity is malpractice." Her words echoed far beyond the hospital's walls. Other medical centers across the state began reviewing their own practices, inspired by her stand. And as for Maya, she returned to what she loved most, scrubbing in, guiding her team, saving lives one incision at a time. But the staff who watched her work saw her differently now. Not just as a brilliant surgeon, but as a leader who refused to look away from injustice, even when it stood in her own lobby wearing an expensive tie. What began as a moment of prejudice in a hospital hallway had become a turning point. A story of courage, accountability, and the cost of arrogance. Because in that hospital, on that day, a black surgeon didn't just heal patients. She healed the system. Now it's your turn. If you believe Dr. Carter was right to confront bias head-on, type justice in the comments. Would you have had the courage to speak up if you were standing in that lobby? Hit that like button. Share this story with someone who needs to hear it. and subscribe to Inspire Now for more real stories where dignity meets destiny. Because sometimes, the most powerful scalpel in the room is the truth.